G'day viewers. So this is just a quick follow-up video to the English buckler from last week, because people have asked, well, now I've got my lovely spun dome English buckler shape, how the hell do I put a handle on it, and what do I use for a spike in order to turn it into a wonderful object like this? So here are some options for you. So let's start with the grip. So really the grip on a buckler can be as simple as getting yourself a piece of dowel, flattening out each end and then bolting it on like that. So, you know, all I did there was flatten the end of the dowel there and there a little bit so it sits flush against the buckler, bolt it on with a couple of round-headed bolts, and that's been good for 20 years, possibly longer, this particular one. The same effect can be achieved with a bit of pipe, which is how the Get Dressed for Battle bucklers are done. You get a bit of steel pipe from the hardware store, you know, that's $2 worth, hammer out each end till it's flat, and bolt it on like so. So again, dead easy, really robust, really cheap, and you can shape this. It doesn't have to stay round, unlike the wood. So this one here, which is a Get Dressed for Battle one, you can see that it's, hopefully you can see that it is slightly rectangular, because I took a hammer to that and flattened out the end until it sat in the orientation that I wanted it to sit in. And then it's just wrapped up in tennis racket grip. Now you also notice that this is offset from the boss a little bit. So depending on the size of your boss and how much room you need between your hand and the boss of the buckler, you can get a longer bit of pipe and step it up like so, so that it sits out a little further from the boss, and that really depends on what you're comfortable with, depending on the size of the buckler that you've got. For these ones, it's not really necessary, I don't feel, unless you're talking about putting a spike in, and then you're going to want to give yourself a little bit of extra room. Another method is to get a bit of steel, and again that could be straight, or you could step it up like that, and then have a bit of wood placed underneath it. So that is again just a bit of steel bar with a piece of dowel, again wrapped up in tennis grip tape, and that's again a nice solid grip there. This is essentially the same sort of thing, but this has been bent into a shape because it's not a very deep dished boss on this one, and so it needs that extra room for the fingers for it to sit out there. So all these things are really easy. For these bucklers, the authentic thing to do is to have a kind of banana shaped bit of wood. So with some stiff cardboard or something, what you would do is make yourself a rough shape so that you get the angle of that right, and then you just cut this out of a bit of wood. This is 20mm thick pine plank. Because of the orientation of these bucklers, you want it to sit kind of forward like that, dead forward. You don't want it to roll around, so quite a rectangular grip on this. So about 2 centimeters thick by about 3 centimeters wide is about right, I think. So roughly that shape, sand it down nicely so it's nicely shaped, and take the corners off, wrap it in a tennis grip, and you end up with something like that. And this is pretty close to the sort of grips that were on the originals, as far as I can tell from the resources I have. So that's the grip. So for a normal buckler, a flat buckler, you want to have it oriented so that you can move it around. It's basically oriented for the edge there, but you need to be able to flip it around and turn it and that kind of thing. So you need to be able to do that. For a concave buckler, this is bad. As soon as you do that, you expose your hand. So you want your orientation to be dead forward. I want to know exactly where the front of my buckler is at all times, so I can keep it pointed at the opponent. Now, spikes. So basically two solutions I can see to this. The first is the bolt. So you get yourself a longish bolt and a couple of nuts and a couple of washers, and you drill a hole in the middle of the boss, and then it goes in there, and bolts up from the other side, and there you have a spike. So this has got a round head on it, over which I've put a rubber stopper and wrapped the whole thing up in tape, and that's obviously very solid. Now you might think to yourself, isn't that going to hurt? Well, I've had this unmodified, just round tip bolt spike in my Taj again for about 20 years. And, you know, if people are wearing, reasonably solid padding, it's fine. That said, with the Taj, you're not really hitting people, punching them with the spike. This is really just used for you getting close to your parry with the sword, you bind with the shield, and this kind of traps people's hands underneath it. So for that, you do want something fairly solid, but you're not really punching at people. With a buckler, you of course will be able to smack people fairly hard in the face. So if you feel that this is not sufficiently padded, spreading the impact depending on what sort of gear you're wearing, you could put something over the top. So for example, use this as the core to place one of those big rubber spearheads over the top, which will bring it out a little further, more like 12 inches, and give it a little bit more flex in the thrust. So that's one possibility. The other option, which is what I prefer, is the Flexi Dagger. So this is a Flexi Dagger blade. It's an old darkwood, I think, that was lying about. So all I've done is cut a slot in the front of the buckler. I'm orienting these horizontally from our experience with the bayonets. You want it that way and not that way. So that's why I'm doing that. So that's done just by drilling a series of holes till it's about the right width, and getting yourself a file and filing it until your dagger goes in up to the hilt. It will be too long, so what I've done is, as you can see, I've chopped it short, but enough so that some of the dagger, hopefully you can see this, goes into this grip. So it actually has two points of support. There's the bit where it goes through the boss, and then it's also sitting, can you see that? It's actually going into the wooden grip. So it is supported in both those places. And by having it horizontally, it means when I hold the buckler, it just sits in between my fingers, right there. So that's nice and comfy. It doesn't get in the way. It probably helps it from not falling out, though, you know, that hasn't really been much of an issue. And then you've got a reasonably safe, flexible thing that is still stiff enough, particularly in that orientation, to bind things, and reasonably safe in there. And it's, for travel purposes, it's also dismantleable, which is great. It doesn't have to stay in there, because this is a big cumbersome thing. We can see that in period people carried these things on their backs because they were so, you know, awkward otherwise. But that just pulls right out and can go in a bag and doesn't take up that much room. So spike wise, the easiest, cheapest thing to do is the bolt. And if you're wearing reasonably rigid protection when you get stabbed, which probably doesn't happen that much, that would be fine. If we were in period, Swetnam would say, put yourself a great big phlox ball on the end of that to spread the impact more. But as I say, something like a rubber spearhead would probably do the job. But by the time you spent money on the rubber spearheads, you may have well have bought yourself a Flexi Dagger and just gone that way, which I think looks nicer, as well as being a little bit more effective and certainly safer if you really want to hammer people with that point. So that is how you put a handle on a buckler and how you put a spike on a buckler, or for that matter, a targe.